On a small island in the middle of the Aegean Sea, on a black volcanic rock with no soil soft enough to grow anything, an old man falls face down in the dirt. He is alone. He has been alone for a long time. Rome exiled him here because of what he refused to stop saying about a man they crucified 60 years earlier. He is the last one left. Every other person who walked with that man is dead, most of them murdered for it. And now, on this rock, something happens that makes his knees give out before his mind can even process what he's seeing. A voice speaks, and the first thing it says is not a warning. It is not a rebuke. It is two words you have heard before. In Sunday school, on greeting cards, stitched onto pillows in gift shops that have no idea what they're selling. Fear not. You have probably heard those two words treated like a hug, like a soft blanket God throws over someone having a hard day. And if that's what you think they mean, I need you to forget it for the next 30 minutes. Because when you go back and find every place in the Bible where God or an angel says those words out loud to a human being, a pattern shows up that should honestly unsettle you a little. This is not a story about comfort. This is not a story about safety. This is not a story about a nice thing an angel says to calm someone down. This is a story about the most dangerous two words in the entire Bible. Because every single time they get spoken, something impossible gets asked of the person who hears them. You watch an old nomad get told, "Fear not," and then get handed a promise he will spend the rest of his life failing to fully believe. You watch a terrified young farmer get told, "Fear not," and then get ordered to do the one thing that will get him killed by his own neighbors before sunrise. You watch a teenage girl get told, "Fear not," and then get handed a pregnancy that could end with her stoned in the street. You watch a group of grieving women get told, "Fear not," and then get trusted with news so explosive that if they're wrong, they'll be laughed out of their own city, and if they're right, they'll change the world forever. And on a black rock in the Aegean Sea, you watch an old man get told, "Fear not," and then get shown something so vast it will take the rest of his life, in the entire book of Revelation, just to write it down. We will get back to him. Stay with me, because to understand what happened to that old man, you first have to go back almost 2,000 years earlier, to a much younger man, standing under a night sky, being told the exact same two words for the very first time. His name is Abram. He is somewhere around 75 years old, and he has just walked away from everything that ever made him safe. His father's house, his home city, the gods his entire family had worshipped for generations. He did it because a voice told him to go to a land he'd never seen, and he went. That kind of obedience should have earned him some peace. Instead, in Genesis chapter 15, you find him lying awake, turning something over in his mind that he can't say out loud to anyone. He has no son. He is old. His wife is old. And the promise this God made him, that his descendants would outnumber the stars, is starting to look less like a blessing and more like a cruel joke with no punchline in sight. That's the exact moment the voice comes back. "Fear not, Abram. I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward." Here's what most people miss about that verse. God doesn't say fear not because Abram is in physical danger. There's no army at his door. There's no famine at his gate. Abram is afraid of something much harder to fight. The slow, grinding fear that God might not come through. And fear not doesn't erase that fear. It sits right next to it. You could almost hear it saying, "I see exactly what's terrifying you, and I'm not taking it away. I'm asking you to carry it a little longer with me." The Hebrew word behind fear here is yer. It's a small word doing a lot of work. Yer doesn't just mean simple fright, the kind you feel from a loud noise or a shadow in the dark. It carries the weight of standing in front of something too big for you, something that makes your knees genuinely shake. The same word gets used later in the Bible for the fear of God himself. That trembling, awestruck reverence you feel standing at the edge of something enormous. So when God tells Abram Altira, "Fear not, do not yer," he isn't offering a small comfort. He's addressing something massive. He's saying, "I know you are standing in front of something too big for you to hold. Hold it anyway." And Abram believed him. Scripture says it plainly. He believed the Lord, and it was counted to him as righteousness. But belief isn't the end of the story. Years later, that same fear not gets tested in the worst way you can imagine on a mountain called Moriah, where Abraham will raise a knife over the very son this promise depended on. The comfort didn't remove the terror. It just went with him into it. That pattern doesn't stop with Abram. Decades pass, generations pass, and an old man named Jacob, Abram's grandson, now with a long life and a broken family behind him, hears that a famine has hit the land, and the only food left is in Egypt, where his long-lost son Joseph now rules as a foreign official. Jacob is old. He built his entire life around staying in the land God promised his grandfather, and now he's being asked to leave it in his final years for a country he's never set foot in. Fear not to go down into Egypt, God tells him in Genesis 46. Fear not, because leaving what you built, your whole identity around, is terrifying, even when it leads you toward a joyful reunion. You can imagine what that felt like. Packing up an entire life at an age when most people are done moving anywhere. Jacob goes anyway. He dies in Egypt, far from the land of promise, having trusted a fear not that asked him to give up geography for family, safety for reunion. But it gets stranger. Move forward a few hundred more years, past Egypt, past slavery, past the wilderness, into the land of Canaan, where a farmer named Gideon is threshing wheat in a winepress. Not on a threshing floor, out in the open, the way it's supposed to be done, in a winepress, hiding. Because the Midianites have been raiding his people's crops for 7 straight years, and if anyone sees him harvesting grain in the open, they'll steal it before his family can eat. An angel finds him there, hiding, and says the strangest possible greeting for a man crouched in fear. The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. Gideon doesn't feel mighty. He feels abandoned. He says so, right to the angel's face. If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened? And where are the miracles our fathers told us about? And the angel tells him, fear not. Peace be unto thee. Fear not, thou shalt not die. Here's the part nobody tells you about what comes next. That fear not isn't followed by rescue. It's followed by an order. Go tonight, under cover of darkness, and tear down your own father's altar to Baal. Not some stranger's altar, your father's. The one that could get you killed by your own family and neighbors before the sun comes up. Gideon does it at night, with 10 servants, because he's too afraid to do it in daylight. The angel said, fear not. Gideon was still afraid. He obeyed anyway, in the dark, trembling the whole time. 3 men, 3 completely different centuries, 3 completely different lives. And in every single case, fear not isn't a soft landing. It's the doorway into the hardest thing that man will ever be asked to do. So look at the pattern so far. Abram, fear not, and then decades of waiting on a promise that felt impossible. Jacob, fear not, and then leaving behind everything familiar in his final years. Gideon, fear not, and then a mission that could get him killed by his own family before morning. 3 fear nots, 3 assignments, 0 comfort that came without a cost attached. If you're seeing this pattern for the first time, you're not alone. Most people read these as separate accounts scattered across the Old Testament. They're not separate. They're one long thread. And it's about to get pulled a lot tighter. If this is opening your eyes a little, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because you're about to move from the Old Testament into the New, and the stakes are going to climb higher than you're expecting. Move forward now, past the kings, past the prophets, past 400 silent years where heaven doesn't seem to say anything to anyone. Then, in a small hill town, an old priest named Zacharias is doing the one job of his entire career that only comes around once: burning incense inside the temple, alone, in the most sacred room a priest could enter, and an angel is standing there, waiting for him. Zacharias is terrified. The text says he was troubled, and fear fell upon him. You can understand why. Nobody expects an angel standing next to the altar, and the angel's first words are the same 2 you keep hearing. Fear not, Zacharias, but listen to what follows. The angel tells him his wife, a woman who has been unable to have children her entire life, now old, well past the age anyone expects of pregnancy, is going to have a son. And this son will prepare the way for the Messiah himself. Zacharias, a trained priest who has spent his whole life reading scripture, does something very human. He doubts. He asks for proof. And the proof he gets is silence. He is struck mute, unable to speak a single word for the entire 9 months of his wife's pregnancy. Fear not didn't erase his doubt. It walked him straight into a consequence for it, and he carried that silence until the moment his son was finally born. Now travel just a little further down the road, to a small town called Nazareth, so small and unremarkable that later, someone would ask, can anything good come out of Nazareth? A teenage girl is engaged to be married. She has done nothing wrong. She has broken no law, dishonored no one. And an angel appears to her too, with the same two words, "Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with God." Then he tells her what that favor actually is. She is going to conceive a child, not by her fiancé, not by anyone, while she is still an unmarried virgin in a small town where everyone knows everyone's business. Under the law she's lived under her whole life, an unexplained pregnancy could mean public shame, a broken engagement, possibly even death by stoning. You can feel the weight of that request. Mary isn't just being asked to carry a miracle. She's being asked to carry a scandal that could end her life, and she has no way to prove her innocence to a single person around her except her own word. Her response is the most staggering 4 words in the whole Gospel of Luke. "Be it unto me." She said yes to a "fear not" that could have gotten her killed. Notice something building here. With Abram, the fear was about an impossible future. With Gideon, it was about physical danger from his own community. With Zacharias, it was doubt met with consequence. But with Mary, the stakes climb even higher. Her body, her reputation, her very life, all placed on the line by 2 words spoken by an angel in an ordinary room. And it doesn't stop with her. 9 months later, out in the hills near Bethlehem, you find a group of shepherds doing the least prestigious job available in their entire society, watching sheep through the night, so far down the social ladder that their word wasn't even considered valid enough to be used in a court of law, and the sky splits open above them. An angel appears, and out of everyone in the entire Roman Empire, every king, every priest, every scholar, these are the men chosen to hear it first. "Fear not, for, behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people." Then the whole sky fills with angels, and the shepherds are told exactly where to go find a baby wrapped in cloth, lying in a feeding trough for animals. Men nobody would trust as witnesses in a courtroom are the very first people God trusts to witness the incarnation. "Fear not, Zacharias." And then 9 months of silence. "Fear not, Mary." And then a pregnancy that could cost her life. "Fear not, shepherds." And then the responsibility of being the first to tell the world that God had become one of them. The assignments keep getting bigger, and you haven't even reached the heaviest one yet. Now you come to the heaviest assignment of them all. And to understand why, you need to remember something about the world these next people lived in. In 1st century Judea, a woman's testimony carried no legal weight. It couldn't be used to establish a fact in court. If a woman said she saw something, the law simply didn't count it. That's the world Mary Magdalene and the other Mary are standing in, early on the 3rd morning after the crucifixion, walking toward a tomb they watched sealed shut with their own eyes. They are not expecting a miracle. They are expecting a body. They've brought spices to finish preparing it properly, because the burial 3 days earlier was rushed. The Sabbath was starting, and there wasn't time to do it right. These women are walking toward grief, not glory. And then the stone is already rolled away. An angel is sitting on it, and the words come again. The same 2 words that found Abram in the dark, that found Gideon in the winepress, that found Mary in Nazareth. "Fear not ye, for I know that ye seek Jesus, which was crucified." Then comes the assignment. Go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen. These women, whose testimony, by the law of their own culture, wasn't even admissible, are being handed the single most important sentence in human history and told to go say it out loud to grown men who won't be legally required to believe them. Matthew's gospel says they left with fear and great joy running together and ran to tell the disciples. "Fear not" didn't mean the fear vanished. It ran right alongside the joy, all the way there. Think about the weight of that. Not a nation's harvest, like Gideon's. Not one family's reputation, like Mary's. The entire truth of the resurrection, the hinge on which all of Christianity turns, first entrusted to 2 women that the culture around them had already decided couldn't be trusted with anything. Which brings you back to the black rock in the Aegean Sea and the old man you left face down in the dirt at the very beginning of this video. His name is John. He was young once. One of the original 12, one of the fishermen Jesus called by the shore of Galilee decades earlier. Now he's the last one left. Every other apostle has been executed for refusing to stop preaching what they saw. Rome couldn't kill John, so they exiled him instead to a barren prison island called Patmos, hoping isolation would finish what persecution couldn't. And there, alone, an impossible figure appears before him. Eyes like flame, feet like burning bronze, a voice like rushing water, holding the keys of death itself in his hand. John doesn't handle it well. He falls at the figure's feet. He says, "As dead." And the voice speaks the same two words one final time, closing a circle that started with an old man on a starlit night almost 2,000 years earlier. "Fear not, I am the first and the last." Then comes John's assignment, and it may be the largest one in this entire story. Write down everything you're about to see, all of it. The whole unveiling of what is coming for the entire world, for every nation, until the end of time itself. An old exile, alone on a rock with nothing left to lose, is handed the task of writing the final book of the Bible. Think about every voice you've heard say these words tonight. A promise keeper speaking to a childless old man, an angel speaking to a farmer hiding in a wine press, a messenger speaking to a doubting priest, a teenage girl facing possible death, shepherds nobody trusted, women the law wouldn't believe, an old exile with no one left. Every single time, "Fear not" was the doorway into the hardest, heaviest, most world-altering thing that person would ever carry. This is not a phrase for people who have nothing at stake. This is not a phrase for comfortable moments. This is not something angels say to make hard days feel a little softer. This is what gets said right before someone is asked to carry something enormous. You know, this feeling, even outside these stories. It's the steadying voice in a doctor's doorway, right before news that will change everything. It's the phone ringing at 2 in the morning, and someone on the other end saying it's going to be okay in the same breath as the hardest sentence you'll ever hear. The comfort and the weight arrive together. They always have. So what do you do with this? 3 things before you go. First, the truth about the phrase itself. Fear not is not a lullaby. It's not something said to calm someone down before nothing happens. Every time it shows up in Scripture, it's a commissioning phrase. The word spoken right before someone is handed a task too big for their own strength. Second, what that means for you. If you have ever felt a strange, steadying peace arrive right in the middle of your most terrifying moment, a peace you couldn't explain, that didn't erase the fear but somehow let you keep walking through it anyway, that might not be a coincidence. That might be the exact same voice that found Abram and Gideon and Mary and John. Because the pattern in this book doesn't suggest God removes people from hard assignments. It suggests he shows up right at the doorway of them and walks in with you. Third, and this is the one I want you to sit with. Every single person in this video was afraid, and every single one of them was still asked to do the thing anyway. The fear didn't disqualify them. Abram still trembled at Moriah. Mary still faced a town full of whispers. The women still ran with fear and joy tangled together. Being afraid was never the opposite of being chosen. Sometimes it's the proof of it, because you don't need to hear "fear not" unless you're standing in front of something that actually matters. So here's what I want to know. Out of everyone in this video, Abram, Gideon, Zacharias, Mary, the shepherds, the women at the tomb, or John on Patmos, which "fear not" moment hit you the hardest? Tell me who and tell me why in the comments below. Because somewhere between a starlit promise to an old man in Mesopotamia and a vision on a prison rock in the Aegean, one thing never changed. The voice that says "fear not" has never once said it to someone it didn't also intend to use. And if you're standing in your own version of that moment right now, remember this. The 2 words you needed most were never "don't worry." They were always "I am with you. Now go."